everybody, over the course of the past few weeks, I've talked a lot about Black, White, Blink in Modern. We've talked about card choice in the deck, the overall strategy of the deck, how to play the deck, how to sideboard with the deck against the top 10 most popular decks in Modern, flex slots and different builds of the deck, and tips, tricks, and different nuances with the deck. So I wanted to combine all of those videos into one giant comprehensive deep dive. Enjoy. So this is Black, White, Blink in Modern. What this deck is effectively attempting to do is capitalize on enter the battlefield effects of cards like Witch Enchanter, Boggart Trawler, Overlord of the Bailmark, Solitude, and Orcish Bowmasters for that matter, by blinking them with cards like Ephemerate, Thalia, and Flicker Wisp over and over and over to generate a large amount of value, while at the same time triggering Ketramos a whole bunch every time those things are blinked, or something's exiled with Solitude, or something's exiled with Relic, or something's exiled with Emperor of Bones, or whatever. So this is one of those decks that has an engine, and then once you get the engine going, the deck is unbeatable. The problem is actually getting the engine going. So let's talk about each individual card. As far as the lands go, it's pretty straightforward. Black, white lands, a lot of fetch lands, because we want to get cards in our graveyard to exile with Relic so we trigger Ketramos. The only weird thing going on with our lands, we're playing a single Sacred Foundry. This to activate some abilities off of things we grab with Emperor of Bones, but also allows us to Prismatic Ending for 3. It's pretty free, just over the third planes. As far as the 1-drops go, we're playing 3 Ephemerate, so 1-mana instant, exile target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control, so it's one of those blink effects, so you get another enter the battlefield effect. And it has Rebound, which means if you cast it from your hand, you get to exile it as it resolves, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast this card from exile without paying its mana cost. So you get to do it twice, which can be pretty disgusting. You can also use Ephemerate to avoid removal spells, because you can blink them out of the way and whatnot. Fatal Push, we're playing 3 of best removal in the format. It is a 1-mana instant, destroy target creature if it has mana value 2 or less, and it has Revolt to destroy that creature if the mana value has it's 4 or less if a permanent left the battlefield under your control this turn. And it's very easy to get that Revolt trigger from all the blink effects and fetch lands. We're playing 4 Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize is a 1-mana sorcery. Target player reveals their hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. That player discards a card. You lose 2 life. Being able to tear apart your opponent's hands are really, really important, especially as we are working towards getting our engine going. Playing 3 Relic of Progenitus. Relic is a 1-mana artifact. We can tap it to have target player exile a card from the graveyard. And we can pay 1 mana and exile the artifact to exile all graveyards and draw a card. Cool thing with Relic is it means if we have it on the battlefield and we have Ketramos on the battlefield, we get to draw an extra card every single turn, because we get to tap it, exile a card from a graveyard, trigger Ketramos, draw a card. It's also incidental main deck graveyard hate, and we can cash it in at any point for 1 mana to draw a card. Which, by the way, when you do that, you end up drawing 2 additional cards, because exiling the artifact is a part of paying the cost, trigger Ketramos, and then graveyards are exiled, trigger Ketramos, and then you draw a card off Relic of Progenitus, so I guess it's 3 cards. We're playing 4 Felia, Exuberant Shepherd, excuse me. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with Flash. It's the goodest doggo. And whenever Felia attacks, exile to one other target non-land permanent. At the beginning of the next end step, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Felia. So Felia does these awesome things and lets us blink things every single turn. We're also able to surprise our opponents by flashing it on an end step, untapping, attacking, blinking something. You know, all those things that I already mentioned. Emperor Bones is a 2-mana 2/2. At the beginning of combat in your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. You can pay 2 mana to adapt 2, which means putting 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this creature, put a creature card exiled with it. This creature onto the battlefield under your control, the finality counter on it against haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So Emperor Bones means that every single turn when we enter combat, if we have Ketramos on the battlefield, we exile a card from a graveyard, trigger Ketramos, draw a card. And then if we have something juicy exiled with Emperor Bones, we can pay 2 mana to adapt it, put it on the battlefield, get that end of the battlefield effect, and attack with it. Very often with Emperor Bones, we're targeting our own stuff in the graveyard, like Solitude and Overlord of the Bailmark are some of the best ones, because we get so many triggers off of them. We're playing an Orcish Bowmaster. Orcish Bowmaster is a 2-mana 1/1 with Flash. When this creature enters And whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, this creature deals 1 damage to any target, then amass Orcs 1. So you create an Orc army, put a +1/+1 counter on it. If you already have an Orc army, you put an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Very good against decks that are looking to draw cards and decks with a bunch of weenies. We're playing 3 Flicker Wisp. Is a 3-mana 3/1 with flying. When this creature enters, exile another target permanent. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is just another blinky thing. It applies pressure in the air, allows us to trigger Ketchermos, and gets more end of the battlefield effects. Playing a Boggart Trawler as a land, which is a black land that enters tapped unless you pay 3 life. But it's also 3-mana 3/1. When it enters, exile target player's graveyard. Just free graveyard hate, gets a Ketchermos trigger, is a threat, is a blocker, and is a land if we need it. Been mentioning Ketchermos a lot, but Ketchermos is a 3-mana 4/4 with Menace, Lifelink, and Indestructible. Ketchermos can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile, and whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from the graveyards and our battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and lose a life. So this allows us to draw cards a lot because a lot of our deck is based around Ketchermos. And then we can pretty easily get things into exile between Solitude, Relic, Emperor Bones, or something's in exile with Flicker Wisp or whatever. It's pretty easy to get 7 cards in exile. And then we have a Menace, Lifelink, Indestructible attacker that is drawing cards every turn. This card is nuts. Played 4 Witch Enchanter as lands. It's similar to Boggart Trawler where it enters tapped unless you pay 3 life. But when it enters, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. Very good incidental artifact and enchantment hate. It's recursive. You can even bounce the land with Flicker Wisp and it comes back as the creature, which is really disgusting. Played for Solitude. Solitude is a 5-mana 3/2 with flash and lifelink. When this creature enters, exile up to 1 other target creature. That creature's controller gains life equal to its power, and we can evoke it to exile a white card from our hand, which means when it enters, you sacrifice it. It's just an alternate cost. So you can cast it for 0 mana as well. Cool part about Solitude, triggers Ketchermos even if we're exiling one of our opponent's creatures. You can bounce it with all of this other stuff. Puts a card into exile if you evoke it, which makes Ketchermos closer to attacking. It's all really very, very cool. And we're playing 4 Overlord of the Baelmerk, which is a 5-mana 5/5 with impending 5, so you can cast it for 2 mana as an enchantment. And whenever this permanent enters or attacks, mill 4 cards. Then you may return a non-avatar creature card or planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. This allows you to use your graveyard sort of as a toolbox, because whenever it enters or attacks, we get to grab something from our graveyard, which is very good alongside Felia or Flicker Wisp, because you can, if you blink the enchantment version of Overlord of Baelmerk, it comes back as a creature as early as turn 3. So if you, the crazy nut hand is impending this on turn 2, it's an enchantment, you get a card from your graveyard, pass, 3rd land, your opponent's end step, Felia, untap, attack, blink Overlord, and now you have a 5/5 that you get another end of the battlefield effect, and now they have to answer it or you start attacking and dealing a ton of pressure and also using your graveyard as a toolbox. And then we're playing Prismatic Ending as additional removal, allowing us to, with our mana base, exile things that are costing 3 or less. It's very powerful and can kind of be a catch-all removal, getting rid of their Ketchermos, whatever. As far as the sideboard goes, we're playing 2 Draenith Magistrate. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Very good against like impulse effects and stuff, like Ruby Storm. Stoning Silence. 2-mana enchantment activated abilities or artifacts can't be activated. This is like our Belcher and Affinity Hate. White Orchid Phantom is a 2-mana 2/2 with flying and first strike. When this creature enters, destroy up to 1 target non-basic land. Its controller may search a library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this is very good against the decks that you need to be attacking their mana base, either because they don't have a lot of basic lands, like with Belcher, or against decks that have lands that produce 2 mana, like with Eldrazi Ramp or Amulet Titan. Aven Interrupter, also very good against impulse effects, but also really good against decks that like are combo-y decks like Titan or Belcher, impulse effects out of Ruby Storm or whatever. It's a 3-mana 2/2 with flash flying. When this creature enters, exile target spell, it becomes plotted, which means they can cast for free at a later turn. However, spells your opponent casts from graveyards or from exile cost 2 more to cast. We're playing 1 Elesh Norn. It's a 5-mana 4/7 with vigilance. If a permanent entering causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Nuts in our deck. We have so many end of the battlefield effects. And permanents entering don't cause abilities of permanents your opponent control to trigger. So we side this in against decks that have enter the battlefield effects being a central part of their strategy. And then it also amplifies our deck. We're playing through Wrath of the Skies. It is X and 2 white. Sorcery, you get X energy. And then you may pay any amount of energy, destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with value less than or equal to the amount of energy paid this way. It's good against decks that have a lot of artifacts or enchantments, or these creature decks that are trying to go wide. And then we're playing 2 Vindicate, 3 mana, destroy target permanent. Mostly playing this as White Orchid Phantom, 5 and 6, being able to take out those problematic lands. So this is Black-White Blink. And as far as the sideboard goes, we're playing Drannith Magistrate as hate for like impulse effects and whatnot. Stony Silence as artifact hate. White Orchid Phantom is a way to hate out lands. Aven Interrupter allows us to continue to punish people for casting things from exile, but also like as counter magic in white. Elish Norn is very good against other decks that have a ton of enter the battlefield effects. Wrath of the Skies, allowing us to wipe the board, also very good against like random artifacts and enchantments. And then Vindicate, mostly as more land hate in addition to White Orchid Phantom. Now the most popular deck in Modern is Boros Energy. Against Boros Energy, we are bringing in the Elish Norn. They have a lot of enter the battlefield effects that matter, though what's very relevant is it means Flage can stay on the battlefield just for 3 mana, which can be kind of awkward, but turning off everything else I think matters a little bit more. And they're playing Wrath of the Skies just so we can wipe their board and reset if we need to. I strongly feel that the longer the game goes, the better matchup that this deck has against Boros Energy, and Boros Energy just needs to aggro us out. So I actually like taking out Thoughtseize so we have less of a chance of being killed in the early turns. And so this is how I sideboard against Boros Energy. The second most popular deck is Dimir Murktide. Against Dimir Murktide, I honestly think that we are pre-boarded for it, and I'm just running it back against Murktide. I think this is an unbelievably good matchup, and there's no cards I want. Third most popular deck is Eldrazi Ramp. Against Eldrazi, we just need to hate out these lands as much as we can. So we're bringing in the White Orchid Phantoms, the Vindicates. Unfortunately, Aven Interrupter isn't very good because most of their stuff is on cast, that we care about. Gonna be taking out this Orcish Bowmasters, doesn't kill anything. They aren't drawing extra cards very often at all. Fatal Push is obviously just horrible. Flicker Wisp is always a decently cuttable card, so we're going to cut 2 of them. And this is how I sideboard against Eldrazi. The fourth most popular deck is Amulet Titan. Against Amulet Titan, we're going to sideboard pretty similar. The White Orchid Phantoms are great. I bring in the Vindicates to continue to take out those lands. We are cutting Fatal Pushes because it doesn't really kill anything in the deck. Cutting Orcish Bowmasters for a similar reason. And we aren't really going that long against the deck, so I like cutting some combination of Relic and Ketramos. It could be 2 and 2 as well. I'm not really sure what's totally right. But this is how I sideboard against Amulet Titan. The fifth most popular deck is Ruby Storm. Against Ruby Storm, Drannith Magistrate is awesome because it means they can't cast things off their impulse effects or from the graveyard. Aven Interrupter is also awesome, being able to stop what they're doing, be able to counter relevant things. Orcish Bowmasters doesn't really do anything to speak of, and we are not playing the long game, so cutting Ketramos is like totally fine. That's how I sideboard against Ruby Storm. The sixth most popular deck is Belcher. Against Belcher, we're bringing in Stony Silence to stop them from activating Goblin Charbelcher. Aven Interrupter is also very good, being able to like counter those relevant things. And then we're going to bring in Land Hate. They normally bring in a mountain to kind of stop the White Orchid Phantom, but keeping them off mana is a very good way to neuter their deck. That being said, Fatal Push is just god-awful. Similar thing with Solitude, and then Relic of Progenitus just isn't doing anything. I think Solitude's a little bit better than Relic, so we'll just do like one of these numbers. And this is how I'm going to sideboard against Belcher. The seventh most popular deck is Affinity. Against Affinity, Stony Silence is obviously great. It can even take out a bunch of their lands. Similar to Wrath of the Skies. Then I'm really not the biggest fan of Fatal Push. Like, you can take out Tamio, but that's pretty much it against this deck. And we're just going to shave on a Flicker Wisp, and this is how I'm going to sideboard against Affinity. The eighth most popular deck is Domain Zoo. Against Domain Zoo, I like Aven Interrupter. Being able to stop relevant cards is pretty cool. And we're going to shave on Thoughtseize. There's really nothing else I want in the board. So this is how I'm going to sideboard against them. The ninth most popular deck is Mono Green Brood Scale. We're bringing in Stony Silence so they can never equip Blade of the Brood Scale. Aven Interrupter so we can counter relevant things. Elish Norn is pretty good because it stops Glaring Flesh Raker from doing its thing. And then being able to wipe the board with Wrath of the Skies is pretty relevant and good. We're going to be cutting a lot of these flex slots, shaving down on Relic and Ketramos and whatnot. And that's how I'm going to sideboard against Broodscale. And then the 10th most popular deck is a new deck to the scene. Is it prowess. I guess is it prowess deck? We're bringing in Wrath of the Skies. Being able to take out their very few creatures is pretty important, and Avid Interrupter is actually pretty okay against the deck. It kind of makes Expressive Iteration awkward, and can stop specific relevant things. We're taking out Thoughtseize just because the deck is so fast, and Shaven on Flickerwisp and on a sideboard against Izzet Prowess. So I'm going to show you the cards that you basically need to play if you're playing this archetype, and the cards that you could play in those extra slots to make your very own buttstock version of Black-White Blink. Let's jump into it. So these are the cards you basically have to play if you're playing Black-White Blink. These 44 cards in the main deck and these 4 cards in the sideboard. Now, when you decide to play this deck, you need to make the decision. What 16 cards are you playing in those slots in the main deck, and what 11 cards are you playing in those slots in the sideboard? Well, these are your options. You have 37 cards to pick from for the main deck and 33 cards to pick from for the sideboard. First off, you can play up to 4 Aether Vial. Aether Vial is a 1-mana artifact. At the end of your upkeep, you may put a charge counter on this artifact, and you can tap it to put a creature card with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on this artifact from your hand onto the battlefield. This allows you to play creatures at instant speed, and when they have entered the battlefield effects that might blink things or whatever, you can really mess up combat, not just by having a blocker. So you really benefit for having a lot of enter the battlefield effects with Aether Vial. And what's coming out of this archetype is there are either Aether Vial strategies or Ketramose strategies. So I'm going to skip ahead to Ketramose. You pretty much either play 4 Aether Vial or 4 Ketramose. Ketramose is a 3-mana 4/4 with Menace, Lifelink, Indestructible, but it can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile. And whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from graveyards under the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So this allows you to get some massive card advantage, but makes you form the rest of your deck around putting things in exile, either blinking things with Ephemerate or Flickerwisp or whatever. Felia. It needs to be less focused on enter the battlefield effects to make Aether Vial good. If you're playing the Ketramose version, you also need to be playing some number of Relic of Progenitus, so 1-mana artifact. You can tap it to have target player exile a card from their graveyard, and you can pay 1 mana to exile this artifact, exile graveyards, and draw a card. So when you play Relic, it means every single turn, if you have Ketramose in the battlefield, you get to draw an additional card because you can just have somebody exile a card from the graveyard. And if you ever need to cash in Relic for 3 cards, you can activate its second ability. Also, beyond that combo is just decent incidental graveyard hate. You can play the 4th Ephemerate. Ephemerate's a 1-mana instant exile target creature you control, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control, and it has rebound, which means you can cast it for free during your next upkeep. This is a card that rewards you for having beneficial end of the battlefield effects. You can also mess up combat. You know, if you ever do this on a Solitude or an Overlord of the Bailmark, the game's probably over. You can protect it from removal spells, you know, whatever. You can play the 4th Fatal Push. Fatal Push is a 1-mana instant. Destroy target creature if it has mana value 2 or less, but it has Revolt, which is destroy that creature if it has mana value 4 or less instead, if a permanent left the battlefield under your control this turn, which is very easy to do in Modern because of fetch lands and whatnot. This is just a very cheap but very, very powerful removal spell that you can play if you want more spot removal. You play up to 4 Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize is a 1-mana sorcery. Target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. You lose 2 life. This allows you to sort of 1-for-1 your opponent by taking cards out of your opponent's hand that might be good in the situations or might be good against your deck, and allows you to kind of control the pace and flow of the game. You can play 2 main deck White Orchid Phantom. White Orchid Phantom is a 2-mana 2/2 with flying and first strike. When the creature enters, destroy up to 1 target non-basic land. Its controller may search the library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This ends up being really good against decks like Eldrazi or Titan or Belcher or things like that, either because they don't play a lot of basics or their lands do like produce more than 1 mana or something like that. And this allows you to have main deck hate for that, which can also be bounced with things like Ephemerate and Felia and Flickerwisp and stuff to get the effect again. Play 2 more Emperor Bones. Emperor Bones is a 2-mana 2/2. Begin a combat in your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. You pay 2 mana and adapt to it. And whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on this creature, which happens with adapt, put a creature card exiled with this creature onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter on it. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. So this is very good alongside Ketramose because even without activating ability, just by going to combat, you get to trigger Ketramose because you're exiling something from a graveyard with Emperor of Bones. But also you can exile powerful things out of your opponent's graveyard and then put on the battlefield and adapt it and make it really big. And you can exile your own stuff, like, and get these enter the battlefield and maybe even attack triggers from things like Overload of the Bailmark or Solitude or whatever. You played 4 Orcish Bowmasters. Orcish Bowmasters is a 2-mana 1/1 Orc Archer. That's flash. And when this creature enters and whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, this creature deals deals 1 damage to any target, then amass Orcs 1. This is very good against X1s, which there's some amount in Modern that's really nice to snipe, like Ocelot Pride or something. Also, greatly punishes opponents for drawing cards and can get out of hand very quickly if your opponent ignores it. Play up to 3 Recruiter of the Guard, which is normally played in the Aether Vial versions of the decks. It's a 3-mana 1/1. When this creature enters, you may search your library for a creature card with toughness 2 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle, which is our entire deck except for Overlord. And so it allows us to play one-ofs and tutor our deck for situations that are beneficial to us. I can play Aven Interrupter. Aven Interrupter is a 3-mana 2/2 with Flash Flying. Very good alongside Recruiter of the Guard, as you can like grab it. When this creature enters, exile target spell, it becomes plotted. Spells your opponent casts from graveyards or from exile costs 2 more to cast, which is only really relevant against like Storm. But this allows you to delay your opponent from like casting things. It's a counter spell. It forces them to, wait a turn to cast that spell again because it's plotted, and then they have to pay 2 more, et cetera, et cetera. You play another Flicker Wisp. Flicker Wisp is a 3-mana 3/1 with flying. When this creature enters, exile another target permanent, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This is just great alongside Aether Vial because it allows you to do all this at instant speed, which is super, super scary, but even good alongside Ketramos because it gets a Ketramos trigger, gets those enter the battlefield effects, and we love that. You can play a Skyclave Apparition. This is a 3-mana 2/2. When this creature enters, exile up to 1 target non-land, non-token permanent you don't control with mana value 4 or less. When this creature leaves the battlefield, the exile card's owner creates an XX blue illusion creature token, where X is the mana value of the exiled card. This you would play as a as a removal spell to tutor up with Recruiter of the Guard, but it's still very, very powerful. And again, exiles, which it can be relevant alongside Ketramos if you decide to play those together. You can play another Boggart Trawler. Boggart Trawler on its front side is a 3-mana 3/1 when this creature enters exile target player's graveyard, or you can play it as a land on its backside, and you can pay 3 life to have it enter untapped. Otherwise, it's just a black land that enters tapped. This allows you to have creatures without having to play like less lands necessarily. You get to exile graveyards, which is really, really, really good alongside Ketramos. And if you want to be super aggressive, you can actually exile the Boggart Bog side with Flicker Wisp, and it'll come back as Boggart Trawler, which is pretty cool. We've already talked about Ketramos. Witch Enchanter is really similar to Boggart Trawler, except it destroys target artifact or enchantments. It's a 4-mana 2/2 that does that when it enters, or you can play it on the other side. That is the white counterpart to Boggart Bog. Very good. There's a lot of like super powerful artifacts and enchantments in Modern at the moment, so being able to have something like this that you can actually just play as a replacement for lands is pretty cool. I play up to March of Otherworldly Light, which is X and white instant. As additional cost to cast a spell, you may exile any number of white cards from your hand. The spell costs 2 less to cast for each card exiled this way. And you can exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment with mana value X or less. It's a pretty good catch-all removal and allows you to like put things into exile from your hands so you can more early attack with Ketramos, which is kind of interesting. Also, exile removal is very powerful, not just in this deck, but being able to take out other Ketramoses and whatnot. You can play up to 2 Prismatic Ending. Prismatic Ending is X and white with sorcery. Exile target non-land permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast this spell. So this allows you to exile things that cost 2 or less if you pay 2 mana. A lot of decks are playing an additional like Sacred Foundry or Temple Garden, depending to be able to exile things that cost 3 or less. And similar to March of Otherworldly Light, it is kind of a catch-all, which is really, really nice. So you're going to be selecting 16 of these 37 cards for the main deck. And as far as the sideboard goes, you're going to be selecting 11 of these 33 cards. You can play up to 2 Deafening Silence. Deafening Silence is a 1-mana enchantment. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-creature spell each turn. Very good against Storm, which can be a pretty tough matchup. You can play Drannith Magistrate, which is a 2-mana 1/3. Your opponent can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Also very good against Storm. Really funny against like Lotus Bloom and stuff as well. You can play up to Exercise, a 2-mana sorcery, exile target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. Again, it's a pretty good catch-all sideboard card, good against artifacts, enchantments, or decks where we want to exile stuff with power 4 or greater. Kind of silly against like Ketramos Mirrors as well, which is kind of cool. We can play up to 2 Sanctifier Envic, which is 2-mana 2/2, perfection from black and from red. When this creature enters, exile all cards that are black or red from all graveyards. If a black or red permanent spell or card not on the battlefield will be put into the graveyard, exile it instead. This is great graveyard hate because most of the graveyard decks are black or red, or trying to reanimate black or red things. And so just genuinely great graveyard hate against those decks. Also, being unremovable is pretty cool as well. Play those 2 White Orchid Phantom in the sideboard instead of the main deck. We've already talked about the applications of that. You can play Clarion Conqueror, which is a 3-mana 3/3 with flying. Activated abilities of artifacts, creatures, and planeswalkers can't be activated. Very good against decks that rely on those activated abilities. Fine in the mirror match if they're unprepared. Decent against Amulet Titan because it hits the card that brings things back. Obviously great against Belcher, obviously great against Affinity, etc., etc. You could play Aven Interrupter in the sideboard. I've already talked about applications of that. You can play Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, which is a 5-mana 4/7 with Vigilance. If a permanent entering causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And permanents entering don't cause abilities of permanents your opponent control to trigger. So very good against decks that rely on enter the battlefield effects because it amplifies our enter the battlefield effects and kind of stops their opponents. You could be playing up 3 Wrath of the Skies, white X. You get X energy. Then you may pay any amount of energy, destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value less than or equal to the amount of energy paid this way. Just a great reset button, and incidentally, very, very good against like Urza Saga and like Affinity and things. Play up to Surgical Extraction. Surgical Extraction is a Phyrexian black instant. Choose target card in a graveyard other than a basic land card. Search its owner's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name as that card, and exile them. Then the player shuffles. Great graveyard hate. You don't need to leave mana open for, and really good to neuter decks that rely on one single card. You can play those Thoughtseizes in the sideboard rather than the main deck for the same reasons. You know, if you're trying to target certain decks with it. We already talked about why, so I'm gonna skip over it. Same thing with Orcish Bowmasters. You can be playing like 2 in the sideboard for the same reasons you'd be playing it in the main deck. You can play a Dismember in the sideboard. It's 2 Phyrexian black and a colorless. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. Decent kind of catch-all and frankly cheap mana-wise removal to be playing alongside Fatal Push. We'll be playing Pest Control. Pest Control is a 2-mana sorcery. Destroy all non-land permanents with mana value 1 or less, and has cycling for 2. Very good against like Static Prism and like possibly Guide of Souls decks and things like that. You could be playing another Vindicate. Vindicate, 3-mana sorcery, destroy target permanent. Mostly you'd be playing this to destroy target lands. Just be White Orchid Phantom 5+. So like Eldrazi Ramp, Amulet Titan, Belcher, and things like that. You can play up to 3 Wear Tear. Wear Tear, Wear side is destroy target artifact. Tear side, destroy target enchantment. Good artifact and enchantment hate in 1 card and their instant speed, which is a really big deal. And you can be playing a single Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. We're never casting this card. The only part of this card that we might do is when Emrakul is put into graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles their graveyard into their library, which is a mill tax is what we call it. You know, if you plan on playing against mill, it's pretty unwinnable matchup unless you're playing a single Emrakul in the sideboard, and then you can slap that into the main deck and make it much, much harder for them to mill you out. But you're going to be selecting 11 of these 33 cards to put into your sideboard, and you're going to be selecting 16 of these 37 cards to put into your main deck, and then you have your very own but stock version of Black-White Blink in Modern.
First off, the Ketramos version, it is really important to know all the ways to trigger Ketramos, and there are so many ways. Ketramos says whenever a card goes exiled from the battlefield or graveyard, then you lose a life and draw a card. And there are a ton of ways for that to happen. First off is Emperor of Bones, which at the beginning of every combat, you exile a card from a graveyard. That's a card being exiled from a graveyard. So beginning of every combat, you get to draw a card and lose a life with Ketramos. Felia, whenever it attacks, it gets the creature that Felia targets gets exiled, and then even though it's gonna come back, it's still entered exile. So you draw a card with Ketramos. Boggart Trawler exiles an entire graveyard. You draw a card. Skyclave Apparition exiles something, you draw a card. Solitude exiles something, you draw a card. Flicker Wisp goes away and comes back. It doesn't matter if it immediately comes back and there's no time for any like reactions or entering the stack or anything like that. Like if it enters exile, you draw a card. And knowing all of these ways is really important. Now, Ephemerate, even forgot about Ephemerate. Knowing all these ways is really important so you can bury your opponent in card advantage with Ketramos, which is what the deck's trying to do. Also, Relic of Progenitus. When you tap it, you exile something from the graveyard, you draw a card with Ketramos, obviously. But something that is not really intuitive unless you actually think all the way through is if you pay the mana cost on Relic of Progenitus, it says pay 1, exile Relic of Progenitus, exile all cards from all graveyards, draw a card. And you have a Ketramos, you will end up drawing 3 cards because exiling Relic is a part of paying its cost, which happens first. So pay a mana, exile Relic, trigger Ketramos, draw a card. Graveyards get exiled, trigger Ketramos, draw a card. And then the ability of Relic of Progenitus, like, lets you draw cards. So you actually end up drawing 3. And what's cool about that is you kind of end up drawing 4 because it doesn't require it to be tapped to activate that ability. So you can exile something from a graveyard by tapping it and then activate Relic of Progenitus, which is really disgusting. Next up, you can cheat Overlord of the Baelmark onto the battlefield as a 5/5 creature. pretty easily in this deck. It's actually one of the deck's nut hands. If you Impending Overload of the Balemark, do the graveyard thing, it's an enchantment, whatever. You can then Felia it, so like you attack, blink Overlord of the Balemark, and then when it comes back, it's a creature. This also works with Flicker Wisp. Unfortunately, it does not work with Ephemerate because Ephemerate needs to target a creature, and when you target it, it's an enchantment, not a creature. So like that's a little difficult and annoying. But the deck's like insane nut hand is turn 2 land, go, end of your opponent's turn, play Felia, untap Balemark, do the graveyard thing, attack with Felia, bounce the Balemark, and then as that Balemark comes back and you have 7 power, that whenever it attacks, you get something back from the graveyard, which is awesome. Also with Ephemerate, Flicker Wisp, Felia, most of the creatures in this deck have end of the battlefield effects. And because they have end of the battlefield effects, if you blink them, even if it's not like something insane like the Overlord thing, it's still going to be for value. You're still going to trigger those end of the battlefield effects. So be really aware of blinking those creatures in your deck. Flicker Wisp actually has a little bit more text than just Felia and Ephemerate. We have MDFC lands like Witch Enchanter and Boggart Trawler that we can play as a land. But Flicker Wisp can target any card in the deck. So we can target the land, and then, similar to Overlord of the Balemark, it comes back as just a vanilla front face of the card, which is the creature. So if we need to use something as a land, but then in the mid game, we want to turn that into a creature and get aggressive or get that end of the battlefield effect, we can actually target that land and then it come back as a creature. And then lastly, as far as the stuff that I think is really important, remember, Emperor of Bones doesn't have to target your opponent's graveyard. Like, instinctually, as a Magic player, value-wise, it feels like you want to target your opponent's graveyard. But you can target your own graveyard, and often targeting your stuff in your own graveyard is even more powerful because your deck is built to have incredibly powerful end of the battlefield effects. So, like, targeting your own Overlord of the Balemark and then putting it on the battlefield the Emperor means you get an end of the battlefield effect and an attack effect, which is disgusting. Or it allows you to recycle the exile with Solitude or whatever. So pay attention to your own graveyard as well, even if your Magic instincts say you should be exiling stuff from your opponents.
If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.